very sorry for this time. It's nap time. I hope you won't be bored too much. Good afternoon to all of you. Xavier Allard. I joined Moët Hennessy at the beginning of this year. I worked for 8.5 years for Hennessy before that. I will talk to you about the way we address vulnerabilities at Moët Hennessy and how Tanium helps us in doing so. In terms of agenda, what I suggest is to introduce you to the Moët Hennessy company and cyber security within that company, to show you how Tanium helps us in treating these critical vulnerabilities when they are spotted, and what is our roadmap for this year and next year. Let's begin with this presentation of this company. MH is part of the LVMH group, which is a leader group in luxury brands. These brands are in six different sectors. Historically, we are one of the two companies that founded LVMH with Louis Vuitton, and we are a big contributor of the group in terms of revenue. What do we produce at Moët Hennessy? Champagne, of course, with the historic Dom Pérignon, Veuve Clicquot are among our brands. We also have more recent brands like Polignac, and which has a partnership with Jay-Z since this summer. We also produce spirituals, vodka, whiskey, tequila, rum, with NC Cognac as a flagship. We also produce sparkling wines. All this production is distributed among 25 brands. In 2020, the year of the pandemics, we managed to produce a lot of champagne and cognac for a total of 4.7 billion euros. We also grouped 10,000 employees. We are divided into 160 countries. We range from California to New Zealand. Among these spots, we have 26 production sites of wine or spirituals. It goes, we do everything there, distillery, bottling, etc. Nevertheless, France is historically our main country, particularly in cognac, in the cognac region and Champagne region. This world presence introduces different challenges in terms of IT, infrastructure, distribution, with some problems of passing bands. We have multiple solutions and data sourcing for the management of the servers and the workstations. We chose to be organized as a DSI organization with one main team and local teams. Let's focus now on cybersecurity in terms of inside the group. There are 7 people directly related to the CEO, as I said earlier on. Today in the Americas and Pacific Asia. But generally speaking, these teams tend to develop as we have a strong recruitment plan. Don't hesitate to come and see me. In terms of fields covered by cybersecurity, we have governance, awareness raising, a strong focus on the industrial side because we have many 4.0 plants. And finally, security delivery is particularly important, and I deal with these issues, incident. Also, the relationship with the cyber bases. Moët Hennessy is one of the basis for that. So there is a strong relationship to be dealt with on a daily basis, as well as all the security tools management. More generally speaking, we work with project teams, also with the operational teams on the IT or industrial sides. And we are lucky enough to work with cybersecurity teams at the level of the holding. So there is a strong community spirit. We try and find consensus to build guidelines that will be implemented in the different for the different brands with different security tools that are promoted but are defined at the level of the group. If we talk more specifically of our topic, how do we deal with critical vulnerabilities? What do we talk about here? That's the definition we have within the group. Generally speaking, we look on a case-by-case basis. We try and have a look if we are above 7.5. Can be a CVE or other types of vulnerabilities. We consider they are critical if they affect the whole park. We are definitely talking about a critical one. Microsoft has often vulnerabilities, but this summer many were to be witnessed. So this led us to be quite reactive and, generally speaking, to review our emergency patching process. Why? Well, because historically we based ourselves on contracts we had with different operators, info managers, and we realized it was not enough. They did not take into account what can be done today with Tanium, and this is why I'm going to introduce you to the improvement you can expect from such a product, I think, for such use. Why critical patching? Why is it difficult to manage? It's already critical patching, so it's difficult to manage. But the first issue is that even if everything is written on a contract, it is not always available directly after your vulnerability. From the moment the patch is available, you have that many hours or days to patch. Second element, even if the patch is directly available, I'm not talking about detour solutions, but they usually people deal with official patches. So even if you have the official patch, another aspect is that you lack visibility on the deployment. You base yourself on the contract, on what the info manager says, but to make sure it really has been done, it is more difficult to be concrete and to be absolutely sure. Second element, the need to synchronize different teams to apply the correction. The worst case would be that it touches all the hardware. We have a team of 15 info managers on different aspects. All these teams are to be addressed at the same time. It is complex. It is complex because we didn't have the correct tools to do so. Finally, third element, when you have critical patching, you do not have the time to apply in pre-prod. So you have to put it in prod, and you have the feeling that you cannot be sure it's the right way to proceed, and to make sure your operational side will work correctly afterwards. If I sum up the 4 steps of the emergency patching process, when the vulnerability comes, first thing you have to see if you are involved, to see what are the machines that are involved. Second element, if you're involved, you take the right correction, either from the editor or a workaround solution. Once you have the correction, you have the operational teams will deploy it, and when you patch, the 4th step is to monitor things to see if everything is okay and was deployed smoothly. What we hope in the end is to manage to patch in 3 days when you have a correction, either the workaround solution or the official patch. We're not there yet, but nevertheless, if we gave ourselves that objective, it means that it's attainable. How can Tanium help us on the topic? I will not introduce you to the product in terms of marketing. What I will explain is how it is installed with Moët Hennessy. So it's a tool that works on a client-server basis. Tanium is already in place in only working with the server teams, the industrial teams. The server teams use it to a lesser extent. The industrial teams should be doing so at 100% in the near future. Tanium, how does it work? You have a certain number of modules. I won't detail them all, but a first module, Discover, that enables to discover that machines, that hardware is not equipped with Tanium. Sometimes you discover machines that you didn't know existed, and then you have 2 modules for inventory and interact, to ask questions to hardware that are live connected. Then you have a specific security module that is interesting because it enables us to show the vulnerabilities of all the machines you want to scan. And then there are two specific modules that are interesting here as far as patching is concerned. The deployment one, for instance, for scripts, to install new objectives, to suppress them, etc., and also with a self-service portal. Generally speaking, this unique tool made us more visible and reactive. I saw it before and after. Why? Well, because all the hardware is integrated, all the OSs, Windows and Linux. You can also integrate AAX. Everything is accessible. All the operational teams can access it. Operators, security, service desk. And in fine, we have a common reference and common methods on which we can rely. Particularly, it enables us to measure the compliance indicators. Tanium deployment now. It began January this year. The idea was to decide where we would deploy this antivirus, for instance, equipment, as we were in coronavirus period. We had to deploy the VPNs. We were also able to do compliance with these VPN client compliance. There was a pilot phase from June to 2020 for standard patching. From January this year, we entered the production period. It was not only on the workstations. Then, I'm not talking about February and March, but in July we dealt with critical patching, and I talked about workstation patching of the servers. From the end of this year, we should also have this server patching in place. Last element on standard patching, we had defined two indicators. The first one was to be able to patch all the hardware in less than 30 days. It was true in May 2020. We are now around 22 days. The patching rate is above 98%. It has been so since this summer. Let's come back to the 4 stages. And I match it with the module, Tanium modules. You can see that on the impact evaluation, we use the editor or the Tanium team. For the patching as such, we use patch or deploy. And for monitoring of deployment, we use trends or comply modules. In terms of responsibility modules, we remain managers, but we are responsible for the evaluation of the impact. But the operational teams patch the machines. all the teams can access the monitoring. If I illustrate it with a concrete example, if you know this Hive Nightmares case, this problem was published on July the 20th, and we had to wait 22 days to produce the KB. They provided the workaround that we had to implement how we could. Then we found this article that detailed the different steps to use Tanium and get to and actually deploy the correction. In the end, when you ask a question with the Interact module, you can see here how it looks like. Well, you ask all the machines which ones once you ask the right question, here's the answer. It is displayed in front of us. You see the question above the screen and the number of machines, devices that are concerned. Here is after the patching phase. You can see well, we could have used a specific sensor to display the vulnerable machines. Here I just wanted to show you the kind of detail level you could have. For this specific fields, you could have match it with other questions asked to other machines to be more precise with these.
Once we know that we are part of this, we'll look for the patch. In this case, the solution to go around, the workaround, is to remove the access rights that were too permissive and to delete the shadow copies so that the attacker cannot come back to the previous folder configuration. This patch is then sent to the operational teams. This is the third stage. And they will naturally use Tanium with the deploy module to apply it. In this phase, if the fix is problematic, Tanium is also interesting. They can target the hardware that are problematic and they can roll back directly. We come to the fourth stage, which is visibility on the deployment stage. From 16th of August, we started this patching campaign. We see that globally, after 3 days, we start to have a machine rate, hardware rate that's patched. That's quite interesting, which means over the entire equipment, we have a much lower value compared to the initial one. This is a trend dashboard, but you can also use comply. It's a bit of a workaround. As I said earlier, comply use shows the overall vulnerability of the hardware. What we see here is that we were supposed to have 380 machines that were not patched, and we see that we are 3,800. What's happening? Why don't I have the same numbers? And the reason is because it's not the same unit. In terms of the trends, we decided to measure the folders that were corrected and the shadow copy volumes that were deleted. So we checked that the patch was properly applied. In terms of comply, it will go back to make sure in terms of whether the KB was really installed on the machines. And this knowledge base was not yet out because it was in August. This is why we have a number of hardware machines that are quite higher. As a summary, in order to have visibility with this method, it works well, especially when we use an official patch. However, if we use a workaround solution, we have to be able to explain it behind. I will finish my presentation with a few lessons learned and the next steps. First lesson is to really prepare the operational teams well for this new emergency patching process. It seems trivial, just said like this, but why is it difficult? Tanium really is a game changer in terms of vulnerability patching, because they give us all the tools we need to follow it from A to Z. So it's under the control of the security teams, but the operational teams are the ones that actually apply the patch. So the complexity at the end of this process of transformation is directly linked to the number of people and actors who take part in this. So we have to make sure that even if the security teams are up to par, that all the other teams are also ready, because if we give the fix directly, if the operational teams take 3 weeks to patch it, to put in place, we've lost everything. So really we have to integrate it from the very beginning. They have to be trained on the tool, because the tool is not magic. It's a very technical tool. It's not, doesn't look like, but it is very technical. We really have to understand what's happening in the background. Otherwise, you can't use it. So there's a training phase that's quite important. And then it is important to define all the different roles, especially to make sure that the teams are not walking on each other, and they can configure the tool depending accordingly. So all of these steps take time, and this is why today we started on the summer. We're not really ready yet, and we will still need a few weeks. The second lesson is not just for critical patching, but it's general, but it's even more for critical patching, is that you have to control with accuracy this assets, this perimeter. So it's easy to separate the assets between workstations and servers. It's, well, even if there could be some user machines that could be servers, but it's a lot more difficult to separate the assets perimeters, IT and industrial, IT and OT. Why is this? It's because we have gray areas. Obviously, automats and the dedicated servers, these are industrial assets, so it's easy to tag them. However, we find ourselves with some assets that are linking the two worlds, even though it's usually really separated, but we have these gray areas. And so if we're not able to really master this perimeter, then when we apply this patch, we find ourselves with some after effects in terms of IT vulnerability that could be quite dramatic. So Tanium also helps us on this with Discover, with all the information that can be brought back by the agent, but it's not magic. It doesn't do everything. You have to be able to interpret this information, go and see the teams, and then apply the right governance and right classification in terms of these different assets. In terms of the 2021-2022 roadmap, first element, as I said earlier, is the evolution of the governance of our platforms, because we only have one at the moment that was at the same time for workstations as well as for servers. We will have a second platform that will be managed at the group level, that will be only for servers, for the brands that we're part of, and then we will keep our platform only for workstations. So we will have to see in terms of governance how this will take place, because there will be a few small changes. We won't be in control of the server platform. The second element is to finish this emergency patching process, but here also there will be an impact as the group is being taken again. So they will want to treat the critical patching in a specific way. So we'll have to make sure that we have an homogeneous approach to the servers. And another internal thing that with Moët Hennessy is to develop Tanium use cases for CyberSOC. We started working on security KPI measures. We really are only taking information from this tool, but we want to also increase the fine-tuning and precision. And finally, we want to put in place vulnerability scans on all the machines of Comply. We only do it today on non-industrial machines, and even in that case, only on user machines, on workstations. And I didn't talk about this other module. It's an impact module that allows us to see the impact that has a user that could be compromised on the assets that had lateral movement. So from this information, we'll be able to bring up a certain number of flags and act on it. These are the 3 big steps. I finished my presentation. Thank you for listening to me all the way. I didn't see anyone falling asleep, hopefully. So if you have any questions, please feel free. First question, we saw with the pre-nightmare vulnerabilities that there were quite serious consequences on the remediations given by Microsoft, especially the workarounds that were not working in some cases. How can you manage these validation of remediation from the business owners, because they're the ones who master and to make sure whether a side effect is admissible or not on a server? Does Tanium allow this interaction? So Tanium will not allow you to answer in your place. The choice is still with the business owners. What Tanium will bring us on this aspect is how fast and the reactivity on this test. If really we're not sure of the patch, it's a choice to say, okay, we won't apply it immediately, or we will define a small perimeter of assets as heterogeneous as possible, so that in half a day, perhaps, I'll be able to deploy this patch and I'll have the results. And of course, it depends on how much time I want to take to be sure. But the big advantage is that we'll be able to deploy it quickly, first, and second is that we won't have to go through the info managers. This is what was in the contract. So we can do this straight on the tool. I take the fix and I define it in advance in the process that I have, for example, a perimeter of 50 assets on which I can test it. This is the first thing. And then we can observe what's happening and try and put in place ahead of time to define the rollback that's the correct one. So the tool, once again, will not answer on your behalf, but allows you to be faster, that's for sure. Hello, Thomas Desbois-Derizy. I've been working for 4 months deployment of Tanium internally. I'm wondering whether you can answer me regarding the deployment. Are you using a Microsoft solution in terms of management, like SSM plus DSM to manage remaining parts, which are about 15% in terms of tests at our place? How are you managing this, and how are you managing the deployment at the large scale on the machines, on the assets? So we're going a bit out of the scope of the security team, because deployment is not really our team working on these. This is more the operational teams dealing with this. However, for us, we don't have SSM for application, the application part. Even for application of Microsoft 365 is managed by Tanium. So in terms of the problems of deployment, of course, I'm new in here, so I haven't heard any feedback, but the deployment had already been done, especially for agents. Maybe I'll let you speak, Jeremy. But globally, I haven't heard any griefs on the deployment of applications with Tanium. I confirm, says Jeremy, we've used the existing tool with MH at the start to boot up, and once the tool was removed, we just used Tanium, and that was it. Also using Tanium client management and putting in place rules with the discovery tool to find assets that had gone through the net, to be able to find ways of deploying the Tanium agent. More in terms of the deployment of the Tanium agent, I know that TCM had to be on the right version to reinstall the Tanium client, because under version 1.6 we're having issues. So from this version it went better, and we were able to have a faster deployment. Of course, I'm talking about Tanium agents. This is the first thing. Second, we had someone who was really dedicated to treating all problematic cases. So to go and make the link with the info admin or with some risk assets that were problematic, and to come back to Tanium. And the Tanium teams, you probably share this. I'm interested to know what you think, but they're quite knowledgeable technically, but they're quite available as well. So it's quite important to underline this detail. But this relation between the two, we're able to surmount this. I have a second small question, if I can quickly bounce back on that. It's regarding the patching system you spoke about earlier, that it goes either through the editors or through Tanium, that can give some IOCs or markers to manage this. But do you have internal teams that are doing R&D that can do research? I'm thinking of Nightmare. Do you have a team on the inside that can try and find annex solutions, activating heritage on SIS32, on rights, on registries? So we don't have any R&D team internally. I'm the R&D team. However, we can be helped by the SOC that has its own R&D. From the point of view of the group, the SOC group will take a positioning on the different types of vulnerabilities and give their opinion. And so according to their research, they'll give us their opinion and tell us this is reliable or not. This is something else that we also need to build on, because it's not really working completely smoothly at the moment. But we're supposed to go on what CERT through SOC is giving us to implement the patch. But at the moment, we're only using official patches. So of course, what is good is that we were able to implement what Microsoft gave us directly, and it was the same as what was given to us by the Tanium community, but we have to rely on the TAM who's going to help us on that. Small question on the solution. Is it possible to have an interface with modules type IPS that could block anti-malware or more classic antivirus systems to manage the prioritization in the patch management? Did you have any of these kind of issue where you had to prioritize? I didn't quite understand your question. Is it coupling with an IDS? We have IPS modules that are directly on the assets, or antivirus or anti-malware that can cover some vulnerabilities. So do you have this feedback on your end that this is covered, that the antivirus or anti-malware is really working? And bring back the priority of some patches so that it's more classic, is not critical. So we're not going to manage this through Tanium. We will do this through SOC that will have all the feedback from the tools, and then we will try and have some virtual patching, because this is what it is really in reality, to avoid having a patch that's unfinished or something like that. So again, according to the solutions we have, it's either the EDR that will block as one type of IOC, so we're quite okay with that. We're not worried, or we could aggregate different tools. But this definitely, the SOC, they're the ones who will manage this part. So we can give feedback depending on the defender alerting on the workstation, on the alert section of Tanium. This is the antivirus part. And you need to have the right module to do this. It's ThreatPoint, so we don't use it because the ThreatPoint is for the teams that are auditors or those who respond to incidents. We don't do this with an MNH. We know that SOC can use this kind of modules, but today we don't have it. This is why we will get at the base, at the source, the logs of the machines will really feed the CM of the SOC, and we will be able to do remediation. I'm just worried about spring effects. Tanium is doing a bit of everything. What kind of brackets are there? This is a very good question. What kind of protections are there? You're old of an ANSI, so if we talk about this kind of tools, we're always worried about these octopus kind of squid kind of tools. It all depends on the context. If we want to protect ourselves from state attacks, it's a bit complicated. But what we see when we look under the skirt of the server and how it's managed, even if it's true, there is a direct relation, not with all the agents, because Tanium works on a system, on a chain system. In between, I have direct access to the agent at the beginning and end of the chain, but the agents really usually give a feedback of the information to the server. The server is quite blocked, it's quite full, it's quite protected. Of course, this is what we know based on certifications that we have, but as long as the server is compromised, everything is lost, obviously. With this respect, this was one of the first things that I gave a feedback when I came in this company. I said, well, if we lose this, everything goes wrong. So it's true on workstations, because we could say, well, I'm going to lose the Tanium server of the workstations, so all my workstations are compromised. That's one thing. But I was especially afraid because if we implement all the tiers of Microsoft 0102, and what we're pushing group-wise is to have Tanium instances that are reflected, to have some segregation, so that if a Tanium server is compromised, we can bounce back on the other tiers. And then also the work with all our info managers that could be problematic is that if we give them a tool that's badly configured, so Tanium can really go back in terms of airbag, but if it's badly configured, the airbag, you can find yourself with someone who wanted to make a change on an asset and will have an impact on the DC that's just next to it. So segregation, physically, the different assets and the Tanium servers, we will be able to maybe solve this. But I don't have a magic answer to give to this. On this topic, there's no magic tool. The Tanium server is essentially, especially in MH, is on premises, so it's not a SaaS solution. Even though we have an out of service solution now, so it brings this that is missing. So we work with some big companies and organizations around the world that's really tested the solution with the capacity to really handle this. But unfortunately, as with all solutions, agent to server, whoever takes control of the server in one way or the other will have a negative impact on things. Now, of course, the solution is quite well thought. So on many teams, especially the cryptography team that wanted to challenge the solution before contractualizing with us, we've had good results. So if someone has the password and wants to do something bad, obviously it's going to be bad.
Je ne sais pas s'il y a d'autres questions.
I don't know if there are other questions or in terms of time. Hello. I wanted to know what was the motivation of Tanium in terms of the WFES of the workstation. What I saw was especially based on the OS. Did you test Tanium on applications outside of Microsoft? Because that's where we have more trouble, more than the pure OS. So on the OS section, comparing what Tanium can do compared to WS works quite well, obviously. The problem is especially when I ask, for example, what are the patches that were really installed? Give me a report, a WS report that was of all the assets that had the patch installed. It really was lacking a bit. This was in terms of the visibility, and then in terms of efficiency, having a WS around the world for all machines doesn't really work very well. So Tanium has a different way of working, has different ways of doing this patch. And finally, we're not linked to only one type of technology, because obviously today we work essentially with Windows for the patching, obviously. We will quickly, because all our Linux machines are with Tanium, so we'll start having Linux patching of Tanium. It's completely different because depending on the distribution, do we patch the kernel? How do we manage the application packages? So this is really fresh. It's really new. We're going to have a first meeting next week, and then in terms of the applications, again, Tanium gives us a visibility. When I say comply is showing overall the vulnerabilities, it's not just OS vulnerabilities. These are all application vulnerabilities that are obviously known because Tanium goes back to a database. So if it recognizes the application, so these are the most often known applications. So you have CVEs of the OS, of the Microsoft products, of other products such as Acrobat, and so on. So this visibility in one central place, you can use it also in terms of Tanium to patch the applications. As I was saying earlier, in terms of the modules that we're deploying, we can deploy an application and update it remotely and uninstall it remotely. This within Tanium, and Tanium gives a portal that's available on MH PCs, and you can choose different applications that you can update and install and uninstall. This is all managed depending on the asset perimeter. So it does actually have quite a large scope, not just OS. I wanted to bounce back on what you said earlier. Obviously, WS is really overtaken, is overworked in terms of its patching capacity, but Tanium will never replace a NAC, a network access control, that will allow a machine to access resources in the network thanks to the security agent that will be deployed. Anyway, this Tanium remains a very efficient solution. And to come back to the question of the person on the other side, we have a team that did code analysis back in front of the server. We didn't have any issues. And even in terms of the hardening of the putting in place the server and file access, and the agent is I'm not listening to what you're saying. I don't want to hear this. So we're forced to do this to make sure that the agent is accredited further. So we have to force the audit a bit. You're quite right. I have a last question. I'm assuming that at the moment you're not fully compliant with Tanium with all your assets, maybe because it's being deployed, or I don't know if it's possible to have 100% compliance. Today, how do you manage this critical patch measurement on these assets that are not compliant? We do the same as we did before. We go on the relationship that we have or with the different operators or the industrial teams. So we don't have Tanium, so we go on SLA, on the direct relation, and coming back to what I said earlier in my presentation, this is where you have to take it case by case. It takes time, and we don't have one tool that does it all. One unique tool to see in real time what's happening. You really have to treat it step by step, case by case. My question was more about the decision making, more than the technical tool of the remediation application. It's rarely the difficulty once you give the direction and the guidance to the info managers, but on the decision point of view, to know what remediation solution to apply in each use case, do you have some kind of maturity that will allow you to rely on the operationals, or do you have to take it back to the cyber team? Today, we really rely on the cyber team. It's always the same things. On the cyber side, we always want to patch everything, and operational side, we don't want to patch anything. I'm exaggerating a bit, but from an industrial point of view, it's logical, because to stop production is really complicated. So raising awareness is very important, because today the choice is really made between the CSO and myself. Thank you. We stop here. Thank you very much for your participation.